So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Dellert, and on behalf of the London Design Festival, I want to thank you for coming today and to welcome you to the second day of the Global Design Forum. You'll see that this year's theme is Design at/from the Seams. This is designed to spotlight the interconnectedness between peoples and practices and the planet, and exploring that plurality in all of its forms. So we'll be unpacking that for the next 3 days. Basically, it's in celebration of the fact that when people come together, it's at these seams that really exciting transformation happens and sparks fly. Reflecting this spirit, the 2025 program has been guest curated by the lovely Samta Nadeem in partnership with our curatorial partner this year, STIR. STIR is a global media house and curatorial agency championing these intersections between art, design, and architecture. So over the next few days, we'll be exploring the intersections of creativity, technology, human imagination, etc. Today's theme is speculative certainties. And this is basically about envisioning the futures where the unpredictable meets the inevitable. Today's in partnership with Lotus. And if you haven't been yet, I would encourage you to go visit their Mayfair showroom. They've got a brilliant exhibition on for part of the festival to do with, it's called DNA times DNA. So it's basically celebrating older archival pieces, but also blending with some new presentations. I'd invite you as well to come back tomorrow. Tomorrow's theme is infinite realities, where we'll be revealing many ways of knowing and being and where that can take us. One of the sessions is partnered with Acoustics, who are a really cool firm doing 360 immersive sound. I'm moderating that one, so definitely come back. So anyway, all of these themes together underpin and capture the spirit of operating at these seams, challenging conventions and reimagining the role of design and shaping a more pluralistic tomorrow. So let's celebrate that, and I'll hand over to Annie.
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth, and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for making time on your Sunday afternoon to join us here for what I think is set to be a really lively and fascinating chat with these four brilliant panelists. My name is Annie Warburton. I run an organisation called the Goldsmiths Company, which runs a thing called Goldsmiths Fair, as you can see there. It's about 700 years old, but I can't talk about it right now because I'm going to host this talk. As Elizabeth said, this theme of design at the seams, the meeting points of different mindsets and different ways of engaging with the world, is very much at the heart of today's talk, which is entitled Analogue Memories. And really what we're going to do is explore the intersection between design and the handmade, craft processes and design thinking. We're going to explore how materials evoke and transmit and convey stories, how materiality makes meaning. We'll look at the relationship of the crafted object to mass production and luxury design, maybe, and look at how analogue elements influence design processes and outcomes. So, to explore these questions, I have four brilliant people here, and I'm going to introduce them to you now. So immediately to my left is Andu Masebo. Andu is a product designer with a background in carpentry, metalwork and ceramics. He's a graduate of the Royal College of Art, and in his practice he shifts between those roles of designer and maker, generating ideas and objects that connect the two. And I'm really pleased to say that in its LDF roundup earlier this week, the Times newspaper singled out Andu's topside stool, which is on show as part of SCP's 40th anniversary exhibition.
I actually didn't know that. So,
so it's singled out as a star piece. So congratulations. So everyone go hurry and see that. There's more to see of Andu's work in LDF, as we're going to hear. And sitting next to Andu is Rana Haddad. Rana, welcome. Rana works at the intersection of art, design, and activism, using public interventions and crafted objects to challenge socio-political realities. in 2013 with Pascal Hachem, she co-founded 200 Grams, a Beirut-based studio that rethinks materiality and local craft traditions to create pieces that are once functional, poetic, and critical. So their practice questions the role of art and design as tools for civic engagement and offers alternative narratives to overlooked urban and social issues. Their works are exhibited internationally and are part of major collections, including right here at the V&A. Turning to Lee Broom. Lee, as I'm sure many of you know, is one of the UK's leading product designers. Having started out in fashion, working with the likes of Vivienne Westwood, since founding his design studio in 2007, Lee has designed over 100 lighting, furniture, and accessories products, which are retailed right around the globe. His practice merges craft, materiality, and innovation, and everything is made by hand at the Lee Broom factory in East London. Lee has also gained a reputation for surprising, engaging, experiential presentations and has earned over 40, that's a huge amount, 40 prestigious awards, including British Designer of the Year and the Queen's Award for Enterprise. And last but by no means least is Ben Payne. Ben joined Lotus in 2022, where he led design development of Lotus all-electric lifestyle cars. The following year, he was appointed Vice President of Design at Lotus Group and is responsible for design and creative leadership across the whole brand. And then just 1 year later after that, Ben picked up an Auto Design Magazine Concept Car Award for Theory 1, which I'm sure we'll hear more about in a little bit. With over 20 years' experience in automotive and design, Ben's held influential roles at Aston Martin, Bugatti, and Makina. So welcome all, welcome panelists, welcome you. So guys, to start off, I'm really interested in unpicking this title, Analogue Memories. So craft and storytelling, materiality and narrative. And I know that each of you have got projects that really speak to this theme of how the material through design can tell stories and evoke memories. And maybe we'll start back with you, Ben, and if you'd like to tell us about Theory 1.
Yes, I can do. I mean, this for us is a really interesting project because it's through the way that we set out the task of creating this vehicle, which is an experimental prototype, but it's also something to very much be used as a brand communication tool. So we very much wanted to, at this point in the evolution of the automotive industry, to generate something very different and something with a lot of meaning to it. So the entire process was dictated by how we look at, if you like, the old world and the new world, to put it very simplistically. So Analogue and the memory of it is something which is very much ingrained in the history of the brand. It became extremely famous for effectively analog engineering excellence, and this is something that still drives us forward into the future. But at the opposite end of this now in the automotive space, you know, digitization and new technology is forcing enormous change across the entire industry. So at this kind of point of crossroads, we shaped this entire project and the process by looking at this idea of analog and the historic side of it, and then digitization and shaping everything around the human being at the core of what we do, because we make very emotional sports cars, they're drivers' cars, and they're really about engagement. And throughout the process of doing this, we use this idea of digital and analog at the opposite end of it, you know, sandwiching them around the natural element, and use that as a decision-making process for absolutely everything we did. So it's a kind of a fascinating project to look at, and you really can understand the brand history, you can understand the kind of conflict and contrast in the industry right now when you look at it, and you also understand that the processes we use are still rooted back in history. So, you know, the analog side of it for us is the start point. As much as we use new technology, there's still a handcrafted element to the way that we actually physically design and create cars today.
Are you still designing using clay models?
We absolutely do, yeah. And you know, even with the latest technology at our fingertips, the clay modeling process, which is something quite bizarre and fascinating to watch, and physically sculpting one-to-one forms that represent the cars themselves, is integral to the process, particularly for something like a Lotus, which is a super emotional type of car. To physically walk around that object and move it and interact with it very much in real time by hand is something which I believe is essential. And it's the only way to get the correct feeling into the car. So that analog side of the process, even with everything people will tell you about computer-aided design software today, is you don't get the same result without it.
Yeah. So just before we move on, can you describe this car for our audience?
It's an object of kind of purity, and it's looking at, again, very, very obviously in the visual narrative of it, analog technology, so, you know, what makes a car perform and effectively stick to the road, and it's leveraging a lot of our historic reference points from really pioneering the development of Formula One over the last 75 years. It then combines that with some really beautiful sculpture and a very, very pure kind of graphical expression of a car, which references things like the Series 1 Esprit, which is a car for me which made Lotus kind of a household name, primarily for how it kind of resonated in culture and film. And then there's this kind of overlay of digital technology on top of that. So it looks a little bit like an object that's, you know, dropped in from another planet, but it has reference points that root it in your understanding of cars today. So it's a very fun project, and you should come and have a look at it.
Yeah, we should all rush and go and have a look. I've seen the videos, but haven't seen it for real yet. Thank you. Yeah, Lee, this meeting point of making and storytelling and the emotional, I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the storytelling aspect of my work is imperative. I can't think of any other way to design, actually. Materiality is obviously very important too. Honest materials, or the history of the materials, or the traditional techniques that we might use in something that looks very, very modernist in its final form. But I've discovered over the years that the kind of emotive response for me is the most interesting. And I always actually designed from an emotional place, even when I started my career. And I was always very hesitant to say that to people, because back in 2007, it was really all about form and function. And I was sort of almost embarrassed to say to people, well, that's part of it for me, but it's not the summation of what I do. Now, fortunately, we live in a world where people are very connected to their emotions a lot more, and the emotions that come out of a tangible product. So if you can't instill those in the inception of an idea, how can you evoke them when somebody puts a lamp in their home? And so often now, when I sort of meet some of my clients or some of my friends who have some of my products, they talk more about the emotive response that they have to the product more than anything else. And for me, that kind of says a lot about design, how it sort of infiltrates our world subliminally as well, and how we kind of react. And design is everywhere. And I think kind of the masses, to a certain extent, don't really understand exactly what design is. It's such a broad word, but of course it's everywhere, from the most hideously designed road sign perhaps to the most beautiful piece of furniture you've ever seen. So for me, the storytelling, the material, the emotive response is incredibly important.
Thank you. We'll pick up some of those emotional topics later on, I think. But before that, I'd like to bring you in, Rana. And again, the same question. And of course, you've got a project right here in the V&A, and we'd love to hear about that and how the materiality in that piece, I don't want to give any of it away, is telling a profound story.
First of all, I want to thank you to have me on this panel. I think it's really a great opportunity. This piece specifically is tied to a very violent event that happened in Lebanon, which is in August 4, 2020, where we had the third biggest non-atomic explosion eradicating the city in 30 seconds. And the violence of such thing is undescribable. And we wanted to try to find a way to evoke it, but not from a victimization side, nor from a memorial side. So what happened is that after the explosion, because we had no government, we were the people, to go and collect all the rubbles. And while doing so, we've kept on finding spectacles on the ground, and this is where it hit you totally differently, because behind these spectacles there is a person. And we don't know anything about that person. Has it been killed? Did that person lose their life? Did they lose their eyes? Did they lose a limb or whatever? We don't know. So what we did is that we collected these spectacles, we wrote the date and the time, and we collected some of the debris, because it wasn't about showing the violence, but it was about showing what's behind, what can come out from that. And what we did is that we decided, because during that explosion, the highest number of people that lost their sights from the shards of the glass on the buildings happened in Lebanon, in Beirut. And we decided then to use the same material, which is glass, and to print on it on purpose the image of that spectacles, and the way the words were coming to us in the same scattered way as our city was, and the same way as our 10,000 thoughts a second of not grasping what happened to the city was coming to us. We wrote to every spectacle a text. And what we're showing here, we called it debris of text and eyeglasses. And the V&A acquired part of a much bigger project. So the idea is to have them stacked on top of the other, so it can read in depth, or it can read horizontally and having 2 or 3 different frames layered on top of each other. The idea of that is that if you are, first of all, to bow to try to find what's in it, the bowing gesture in itself is of a respect. So people have a tendency to come and to just plunge in it, if I may say. And at the same time, realizing that in the depths of all this, the blur is beyond anything, because no one can grasp what happened. And even until now, after 5 years, I don't think I can grasp what happened to my city. And I think that each one of us has lost a piece of us in this work. So again, the materiality itself is holding that memory. It is itself the weapon that torn so many lives and so many eyes. And ironically speaking, the spectacles are about glass, and we depend on them to see better. So somehow there's a full loop. So materiality does have a lot to say, and the relationship between what it gives and how you start seeing differently the minute the eyeglasses are taken away from their context. They become that ready-made that has something totally different to say, and yet it still carries its function, and it still carries the depth of what it can do. And so I totally agree on that this theme is between the two, the dialogue between the materiality, the emotion that comes with it, and the projection into a future that allows us to speculate differently for how we think about things, and perhaps even be more critical on what we live and how we go about it.
Thank you, Rana. It's an incredibly moving and tender piece and a tender story that you've told me. And what comes across as well is the care and the slowness of pace through making that is embodied in the piece. And those two, and there are others, are themselves craft values. They're the opposite of high-speed production, and create that sense of contemplation and as you say, reverence for what has happened. And perhaps we'll pick up these craft values later on in the conversation. But first I want to bring in Andu, and I know in your practice, cars feature in your practice as well, but in a very different way. And I know you've got a couple of projects here at here in this year's LDF, but I was wondering, just to start off with, if you'd tell us about your car project.
Yeah, so 2 years ago, I did a project that was in the V&A for, I think, 3 months. I make things. I'm interested in how and why things are made in certain ways. But more specifically, I'm interested in making things of value that containers of value beyond the kind of traditional ways we ascribe monetary value. How can I make things that mean something to people? So I had this idea to make a project with the car, because I feel like cars, as far as inanimate object, I guess it's an animate object, but as far as kind of like objects that can be made, there are no things that can take on so much personality as a car. They kind of infiltrate your lives. They go on holiday with you. Your children grow up in them. You give them names. They can mean really deep things, but they can also be things you drive to the shops to pick up, groceries. So I did this project where I found a car that was near the end of its life. I took it completely to pieces, and I also managed to find all of the people that lived with that car over the 25 years that it was on the road, partly because all of the paperwork was physical paper, as opposed to now where it's all digitalized. But I then traveled around the country and met all of these people that lived with the car and got stories from them about what it meant to them and where they went in it. And then I used the pieces of the car to make furniture rooted in the stories that the car meant. And it was this, I'm trying to access it now in my mind because it's 2 years ago. But I think for me, the feeling I had in the project was I was kind of creating an obligation to serve the memories of this car. And some of the people, one of them was a boy racer, one of them was, just wanted it to go to the shops and back. But I met the most amazing woman that was the first owner of the car. And not to like create a synopsis of her life, but she owned that car. In the time that she had that car, her husband passed away from cancer, and she told me stories about how that car was kind of like woven into her sense of not getting over the death of her husband, but realizing she had a life to live beyond the one that they shared together. And beyond that life they shared together, she climbed Mount Everest base camp, went on an icebreaker to retrace Shackleton's steps, and went on I didn't ask her age, but I would guess she's, I don't need to guess. She's advancing in her years, but the adventures she had put mine to shame. So it became a project where I had to kind of serve the memory of this car and make things that they didn't kind of contain the full story, but they had a kind of they kind of like reached towards it almost.
Kind of sampling the stories and remixing them, but again with great tenderness, very, very personal. Rana was talking about a whole city, a community, and this becomes individuals within the city, and then this becomes even more individual stories interwoven through the furniture. I would love to hear a bit more, just thinking about cities. I know you've got a landmark commission as part of this year's LDF. We were talking about it a little bit before we started. This is on the South Bank. I'll let you describe it. But for me, yesterday I lived just behind the South Bank, and that was where the marchers were amassing, literally outside my door, and it was, as you might imagine, not very pleasant. But I'd walked past your piece, and it literally lights you up, so it gave hope. But please tell us more about it.
Well, I'm glad that happened, because that really is my intention with all of my work. And I didn't know the march was actually going to be so close to that environment, and the fact that you said that really does kind of brighten things up for me, because it has been a sort of miserable week to a certain extent because of the things that have been happening in the city. But essentially for me, the project is twofold. It's about materiality and the environment, and then the construction of the piece, what happens afterwards, and then the emotive response that people have. And essentially, it's in the South Bank, it's in front of the Royal Festival Hall. It's an area of London that I've always felt very inspired by, and I think a lot of designers have felt inspired by the South Bank. And what I wanted to do was create something that really spoke to the environment and the landscape, and didn't feel sort of like something that was a foreign object that just arrived, that was in the artist's head and it could have been put anywhere. It needed to sort of speak to its environment. So it's very much inspired by the sort of postmodern architecture of the Royal Festival Hall. Also the brutalist architecture of the Hayward Gallery. In fact, the cast glass we have the same imprint of wood cast onto the glass that the Hayward Gallery has imprinted onto the concrete, which you can see if you look very closely. And then essentially it's formed of individual lampposts, and that was really inspired by the classic Victorian lampposts that you see lining the embankment and the South Bank, and taking that in multiples to create almost a sort of giant floating chandelier, which is obviously pertinent for me being a lighting designer. It was important to kind of bring that element into it as well. The glass is very sustainable, made by Brockus glass, so it's repurposed glass from fragments that was done from the blowing that they throw into a sort of casket, and then it gets fused together. And then afterwards, when the installation is taken down, which is actually going to be in February, it forms part of the Winter Light Festival in the South Bank. Public can actually buy some of the installation, with some of the proceeds going to a charity called A Place to Be, which helps children in schools with mental health difficulties. And they can buy one for £500. We're turning them into table lamps, which you can have for your home. So everybody kind of can invest in a limited edition Lee Broom, Brockus, Beacon, South Bank piece of art, essentially. But then the other aspect of it is kind of how people feel when they see it. So it's rooted in place, it feels familiar, and I think some people have almost said to me, wow, it feels like this should always have been there, or it is sort of part of the environment. And whether you stumble upon it by chance or whether you visit it by design, I want people just to sort of look and stare and either be in thought or no thought at all, in the same way that you would sort of gaze at a beautiful sunset or stare at a full moon at night. And I think light particularly has an ability to be able to do that. It's also automated that when Big Ben goes off every 15 minutes, it goes on this choreography of light and it starts to move and dance. So it's important that children in the area as well get to interact with the piece too. So it's very, very much layered, but essentially I think people almost have a familiarity with the piece as soon as they see it, which I really like. I love innovation in design that's sort of like the bleeding edge of new technology. But for me, my thing is sort of like tapping into those memories and activating them in other people, and for them to say, it reminds me of this, or it reminds me of this from my childhood, or this period of my life, or a difficult period maybe. And that's what I kind of like about all aspects of my design work, and particularly this landmark project.
Thank you. And would you say, you're known for light and lighting, but is light a material for you, or is it a product of the materials that you work with?
It's different. I mean, I tend to start with the sort of more sculptural element first off. You know, I kind of have an idea that I like, most designers kind of become obsessed with, and then you start to delve in and do lots of research. So often when I'm designing, I'm not designing a light fixture at all. I'm just kind of designing sculptural objects, which I will then incorporate light into, perhaps. And that's where it becomes very tricky for us, because, you know, we're kind of incorporating something that shouldn't really be there. And that's where we're kind of blessed to a certain extent with LED technology that we can really do that. But for me, the materiality is very important as well. And traditional craft to a certain extent, and playing with that with modernism. I am a modernist, and anybody that looks at my work would say they're incredibly streamlined and seamless, but with every single one of my pieces there is some historical reference, whether it be from Art Deco or Bauhaus, or perhaps mid-century, or even something from the 18th century or Renaissance period. There is something there, and I guess I got that from my training with Vivienne Westwood, because she was always looking back to the past, and she would say to me, don't ever do something from a modernist view. Go back and understand where we've come from in history to understand where we are now as individuals and as designers. So I think that that's why my pieces, although they're modern, they have a certain sense of classicism about them, which allows them to have a bit of longevity, I think, which is important to me. And that comes from always tapping into something historical.
They become timeless, which is great.
Yes, exactly.
This is how it works usually.
And I like to think really about what's going to happen with the products in the next 10, 50, 150 years, you know, kind of, that interests me as much as what's happening with it now.
Yeah, that longevity is very much part of my practice. As I said, I work at a very ancient company, and it's 700 years old. So the question I ask is, where will we be in 700 years' time? How can we be, we're here because of our ancestors. How can we be good ancestors to those who come after? But of course, Lotus is coming up for its 80th anniversary pretty soon. And I know that your projects, Ben, are very much touching into this theme, as you were talking about earlier, of drawing on the heritage and that narrative, but marrying it with the cutting edge of digital and virtual technology. But where does material fit into that?
Material is a really key part. I mean, we kind of describe it internally within the creative team in a company like Lotus as kind of blurring the boundaries between the two. And I think we're trying to make sure that the digital technologies that we have got a way that is relatable to the human being, the customer, or the user of the vehicle in a more, well, tactile is obvious with materials, in a more tactile and a more kind of emotionally engaging way. You know, digital technology in essence can be extremely cold, and I think we're at a point where certainly my belief is that there'll become a time, and it's not too far away, where people have kind of had enough of it, and we've reached that kind of peak of digitalization and interacting with screens, and people want to go back to something which is a little bit more natural in its approach. So we're looking at how we can use materials and embed technology in the materials, or really maintain a level of craftsmanship which is a more human way of communicating or interacting. And it's particularly important with, I believe, a storied brand, a brand with a long legacy, that we have that connection. And the digital thing is a very new element of what we're putting into those vehicles and those products. And it needs to be done in a way that still somehow talks to the past. So I think we're going to go quite quickly past the peak of people wanting to interact with technology in the most modern way possible. And I think the way that it will mean something into the future is how we rebalance that with something which is more traditional and more natural at its core.
Because we're embodied, we're in bodies and we're embodied, right? We relate physically to the objects around us, like you were saying, Lee, designers all around us. But I'm curious whether that sensitivity to materiality and the tactile, whether it can work at scale. I don't know what you think.
I mean, I'm relatively early on in my career, and I'm starting to reach towards scale. And I think that's a challenge that I am trying to embrace. I know how to, within the four walls of my workshop, I know how to make things that speak to people in certain ways, how can I, be slightly removed from the process of making those things, or reach more people? And I think it's just an ongoing thing that I'll have to kind of keep track of as my career goes on. But also, I think sometimes a practice, you can be engaged in a certain way of thinking in your practice, and as long as you're cognizant, when you do something else, it in some ways contains some of that thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, there's sort of cross-fertilization and seeds of different projects in each other. Rana, I know that you also work with artisans and makers and craftspeople, in part, as I understand, to help preserve crafts, but also translate them. And tell us more.
What's nice about working with artisans is that, first of all, to take the time to sit with them and to hear about their craft, and to hear about how they go about their craft and how they ended up learning themselves from their grandfathers or whoever in the family, and to actually discuss with them a way to change with us to do something different while honoring their craft. And I think that this is where it's a bit like what you were saying, is like, how can we bring and conserve at the same time, but give a new life to a craft that needs to survive in the digital world, where we can, as designers, help them do this step. Sometimes it's really very nice to see that, and to actually interact with them to try to get at that level. And just want to pick up on what you were saying before. What's nice about the analog is that we need to be slow, but not to be slow in a way that I have all the time in the world, as much as appreciating the sensitivity and what it means to work with your hands. Because first of all, the cognitive recognition of the hand in the brain is the biggest part in our brain, and having that would allow us to be more creative, would allow us to be more respectful of any incident that happens when we work with our hands, and at the same time to discover that sometimes the incident is the best thing that can happen to the piece that you want to produce, or a new piece, a totally new idea can come out of that incident. So the way we work is just by doing.
Yeah.
So we have that thing, we call it the kitchen. Our workshop, we call it the kitchen, and we always say, do it, then fix it. We will worry about it after we try it and then see the outcome of it. So, yeah.
Why do you call it the kitchen?
Because it's really a kitchen, you know? You have all the materialities, you have all the things that we collect, because again, a lot of time we start with ready-mades. And ready-mades are actual, even though industrial object, they come with a history, and they come with a certain, not message, but the dialogue that belongs to them, in the way they function, in the way you use them, in the way they, and then suddenly you start dismantling them or do something to that, and then rework it out, and it tells you something new. And then any addition that you do to that in your kitchen, new ingredients, then it will transform that object to say something different and to project into a new dialogue. So this is the kitchen.
It's
this
also
is how we cook.
Makes me think of a lab as well. I mean, you're describing an experimental process, and experimental science, as we know it now, evolved in the Middle Ages out of craft processes.
But may I say why kitchen and not lab? A lab tends to be very cold. A kitchen has a lot of emotion, because when you cook, you put your soul in it. So,
yeah.
And these objects do carry something, like what Lee was just telling us.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, For sure. I wonder what we do. We began talking a little bit earlier, and I'd love to hear from you. This is definitely off-piste. It's not on the question sheet. But what you think about education and, you know, supporting the next generation to become makers or designers. You know, we know that in this country, the number of students taking design at GCSE has plummeted by more than 60%.
My personal opinion is that I don't know why we've taken the creative industry or the creative education into the academic context. To have a scroll and a cap and a gown at the end of your master's or a degree has no relationship to a life of practice or a kind of artistic process of making things. And what it means is you have to pay tens, almost hundreds of thousands of pounds to get that kind of accreditation that is within the academic system. You could be in a warehouse on the outskirts of a city with interesting people in a room and time and materials and grow and learn a lot more. So that's my...
I think the clue is in the word, isn't it? Practice. It's about doing rather than learning about. But I do worry that young people, you know, children are not getting materials in their hand and discovering.
Yeah, it's a complex thing, and I think that sort of ministers of education don't really understand it. I think that's the thing, and I think you're right. It's sort of when you're creative, it's a very complex thing, and a lot of successful creative people are born with that. They can't do anything else. For me, certainly when I was at school, I found the academic subjects really challenging, but I would strive in the artistic ones, and the push wasn't really there. But I found that really kind of taking on internships and getting younger people onto programs and apprenticeships into an environment, into a creative environment where they can not just understand the workplace, but understand the tools and the techniques and how things work to sort of be or think as designers. And the thing that I loved about going to art school, and I went to Central St. Martin's and studied fashion, was when I was there, you know, they didn't teach you how to sew, they didn't teach you how to pattern cut. It was like, you need to work that out. What we're going to do is teach you how to be and think like an artist. And this is your time to experiment, and this is your time to make all the mistakes that you need to.
I mean, on that thing of mistakes, like, of course there's commerce involved in all forms of creativity to a point. When it becomes a profession or a kind of practice that you sustain in itself. But that kind of room to experiment and fail and grow and learn is reduced by, you know, the master's I did was 2 years long, but now it's a year. I don't know where the room is to experiment and fail when you've got, you know, you've got like 9 months, and you know it has to pay. You know, the decisions you make are kind of restricted to what will work in the marketplace. So yeah, I don't know.
Are things more hopeful in Lebanon?
No, sorry. I mean, I taught for the longest time, and I had to resign because of that, partly. Because actually, students in creativity need to play. We took that away from them. Even kids at home need to play, and we took that away from them through the digital world. So we have a major problem, and it is our responsibility. It's not the young generation's responsibility. We need to adjust, and this is why I resigned. This is what I said in my department. We need to adjust. If we don't, it's a pity, because we would be losing the creativity and the creative mind, and I don't think it's something that humanity can afford.
No, it's an essential if we're going to get through where we are right now. Ben, are you hopeful about the next generation?
I think we have to be hopeful. I mean, I think it will come from the way that people interact in general, and it will be driven more by society. As I said, you know, taking the idea of digital and time, as you've expressed, and, you know, being able to fail and do things. Everyone is pushed by the limits of technology. We're all told this is the future and that's where you should go and this is the most valuable thing. But I believe you're starting to see a place where that's actually not really the case. You know, people are valuing things that are crafted, handmade, have experimental things in them. You know, your digital device is not the most kind of high value object that you can own these days. Definitely not. You look at many, I mean, even if you link it back to commerce, as you've said, you know, unfortunately that drives everything. You need to sell that and make money out of it. But the most high value objects today in many, many spheres are not the ones connected to the pinnacle of technology. And I think this will drive the education systems to put crafting, handmade, imperfection, something that comes from the human being back into the things that we actually place value on. I think that's where it really is important.
But this is what we're missing in our education system. We didn't bring the craft to the university, nor we are projecting for our students to go there. We're not encouraging them. And I think that this is where there's a gap. So I totally agree with...
because people are chasing the kind of money at the end of it.
Precisely.
And if you're told that's driven by doing the digital things and the fast and the, you know, digital is fascinating because, you know, there's, in the world I work in, very little investment in it. If I'm going to make a physical object at scale, you need to research how to do that in the right way. You need to create the tooling. It's very expensive. If I do something in a digital interface, software code and it's a couple of guys sitting at a desk, literally. So there is no investment that goes into that beyond the time of people. And to invest in a physical object that's going to be made at scale is a big commitment. So you see a world that's driven by your ability to provide new experiences, give different things to people, effectively sell them a new product, where for the large you know, manufacturers out there, it's actually extremely efficient in terms of generating profit. But it's where the value really is. And I think you'll see, as I said, it will go beyond that. People will want the things with a proper story, with a, you know, a legacy behind it where you can understand that there's real people involved in that. And it's not just spat out of a machine.
It's made by someone somewhere.
That's where the real value is. You know, again, think of the most high value. I pick a